PC gamers have had to endure a lot of dumbing down as game development has moved multi-platform. We had Aspyr and we ended up with R6 Vegas, we had System Shock 2 and we ended up with Bioshock, and we had Fallout and we ended up with Oblivion 2. There's a seemingly endless list of games that are dumbed down so much that they end up flat, devoid of the intelligence and the intricacy that made the older games special. And to that list, perhaps at the very top of that list, may be added Dreamfall, the sequel to The Longest Journey. The Longest Journey is a very traditional point-and-click adventure game, and it's one of the most difficult I've played. I don't think it's a particularly good game, and I haven't played it all the way through, but it is an actual game with actual gameplay. Dreamfall, on the other hand, is a third-person interactive film, the gameplay of which is almost exclusively running from one completely non-interactive cutscene to the next. Now, I fully understand that the point-and-click genre struggles to find an audience, certainly on systems other than the PC, though Telltale may disagree with that, and I happily accept that Dreamfall needed to not be a point-and-click adventure. What I can't accept, what I can't understand, is that they didn't substitute one set of gameplay mechanics for another, they just stripped out the gameplay entirely. Dreamfall is one of the most mind-numbing games, not that it really deserves to be called a game, I have ever experienced. But before I get to that, I suppose I should tell you about the story. Although Dreamfall definitely works as a sequel, it needed to work for people who haven't played the original, which is presumably at least 50% of their intended audience. That means they needed a story that works on its own as much as it does as a sequel, and as someone who's only played through the first disc of TLJ, I can tell you that it does work on its own. There are a lot of nods and direct references to TLJ, but these things are either explained or just not important in the first place. You mostly play as an English girl called Zoe, notably not the protagonist of the original game, April Ryan. She does play a role in the game and you do play as her a little, but Zoe is the main character. Zoe is a very typical girl with very typical problems. Her dad's going away for a while, she's been unemployed for a long time, she's having a party tonight, she's always late to the gym, she's recently split up with her boyfriend. I know these things because the game spent about 30 minutes ramming this information down my throat at the start. I'm a big fan of expansive storylines and little details I can sink my teeth into, and then argue about on the internet with other geeks with serious vitamin D deficiencies. But these characters drone on about the most inconsequential and unimportant things. If they were well written or funny, then sure I could accept or even embrace the inconsequentialities, but they are neither. The plot eventually thickens as Zoe's former boyfriend goes missing. Zoe's search for him takes her to America, Japan, and to another world entirely as she's swept up in April Ryan's story. You'll also play as April, now a resistance fighter in this other world, and as an elite assassin charged with taking out April. The core story is actually pretty interesting, with a lot going on across these two worlds in converging storylines that you get to experience from multiple perspectives thanks to having 3 playable characters. But it's only the core story that's interesting. Dreamfall's approach to story is to throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. It's bloated, long-winded and boring, and again, most of these cutscenes come in lieu of actual gameplay rather than bookending levels or set pieces like a normal game. I'll illustrate this with an example. At one point a few hours in, you have to get through a gate locked with an electronic padlock. As soon as you hit a piece of technology, you'll know to phone your tech-savvy friend. The game spends quite a sizable chunk of the first 2 hours making sure you know just how tech-savvy your tech-savvy friend is in the most blatant and ham-fisted way possible. So you phone your friend, which happens automatically when you use your phone, and watch a non-interactive cutscene where your friend tells you you need an electronic lockpick, which you have to find. Since you passed a merchant earlier who calls you over and tells you he can sell you anything you want, it's fairly obvious what to do next. So you run back to him and engage him in conversation. Zoe will tell him that you need a lockpick. Again, this is with no point-and-click adventure or RPG-style dialogue tree, you just sit and watch. And he tells you that he has one, but he won't sell it to you. You then get one of the very infrequent dialogue choices throughout the game. You can plead or be angry, it doesn't make a difference what you choose. He then tells you he wants a cloaking technology for mobile phones, something your tech-savvy friend conveniently discussed with you early on in the game in another lengthy, non-interactive cutscene. So you use your phone again, which automatically calls your tech-savvy friend. A cutscene plays and you receive the cloaking technology without putting a finger near your keyboard or mouse. You then talk to the shopkeeper again, and another cutscene plays where you get the lockpick in exchange for the phone clock. So you then run back to the locked gate, use the lockpick, do a bizarre little minigame where you match up shapes, which is, I guess, what hacking is like in the future. You solve this simple puzzle and the lock falls to the ground. All of that lasts around 30 minutes, and all you did in that time was call your friend, who is the solution to every technology-related problem, realise that shops sell things, run back and forth a bit, and solve an exceptionally simple shape-based puzzle, and watch a fuck ton of cutscenes. And this isn't an isolated example, the whole game is like this. Whether running home to collect your backpack, running into town to meet with your ex, or running around the alternate world looking for a crazy woman's baby, all you're really doing is running from one cutscene to the next, finding blatantly obvious solutions to a stream of dog's body problems. The only thing I can say in Dreamfall's defense is that some of these problems sometimes have alternate solutions. One example of this is a spider robot thing. You can sneak past it, I'll talk about stealth in a moment, or you can inspect it, phone your tech-savvy friend, and find out how to disable it. Both ways are simple and offer no particular reward, though multiple ways to solve problems, albeit simple ones and albeit only some problems, is still commendable. Like I said earlier, I can understand that Dreamfall perhaps had to not be a point-and-click adventure game, but I can't understand why they would choose to make the only gameplay mechanic running back and forth, solving inane and obvious problems. Okay, I am being a little misrepresentative. There are two other gameplay elements, but they are so awful I wish they weren't. In addition to running around, there's also combat and the previously mentioned stealth. The combat is by far the most hilariously bad of the two. One button is block, one button is light attack, and one button is heavy attack. To win any fight, you stand still until an enemy attack animation begins to cycle. You sidestep so they miss you, and you smack them in the face, and repeat. Double Dragon had a more nuanced combat model. They at least had the good sense to make combat a very minor element. There are only a few fights in the entire game. The stealth is slightly better, but still a joke. A typical example of a stealth section is when you have to sneak around a sleeping dog, but you can only safely do this when a train rumbles by to muffle the sound of your movement, which conveniently happens every few seconds. Not only is this sequence devoid of any tension as you're completely safe when the train goes by, the game very blatantly tells you this so you don't even have to figure it out. So the entire sequence is reduced to walking very slowly past the dog to get a key, then very, very slowly walking out, standing still and waiting whenever the train disappears, all with absolutely no danger to yourself whatsoever. There's nothing to figure out, there's no danger, there's no challenge to overcome. What does this sequence add to the game? What is its purpose? These are questions I ask myself more than once while playing Dreamfall. What makes the game almost nearly bearable is that it's pretty. Even today it's a good looking game. Zoe is definitely easy on the eyes, and actually realistically proportioned, which is remarkable. And the developers found an excuse to have her wearing nothing but underwear more than once, which is hard to fault. There are a bunch of different locations as I mentioned earlier, and this somewhat frequent overhauling backdrop at least adds some diversity. What really drags it down is how static it all is. The world is completely lifeless, and the characters in the cutscenes barely even move their arms or hands or anything at all, making them look like mannequins. It's a good looking game, but it's boring to look at. The voice acting is hit and miss, which is a big problem for a game that's 9000% cutscenes. The girl who plays Zoe is intermittently good, with spells where she's obviously reading rather than speaking her lines, but I just find it refreshing to hear an English voice, so I can let it pass. There are plenty of American, Japanese and other European voices in there, and some are good while others are terrible. One of the Oriental characters seems to be a deliberate racial stereotype, while most of the Japanese voices seem to be American Japanese rather than actual Japanese, so there's a pretty convincing claim of xenophobia to be made. Dreamfall is an abomination. It's the most mindless, most non-interactive game I've ever played. Hell, it made me wish for a quick time event or two, just so I had something to do, and that's really saying something.